All right, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're taking a look at a story about wealth and deception and murder.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you sent over some excerpts from the Wondery podcast called 48 Hours, Follow the Money, and it covers this really wild story of Andrew Kissle,
Mm-hmm.
who was a real estate developer, and he was found murdered in his mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut,
Wow.
just days before he was supposed to be in court for bank fraud.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so this case has so many like twists and turns. Like you couldn't make this stuff up, and we're gonna unpack it all today.
I think it's a story that a lot of people will find really fascinating,
Mm-hmm.
especially because it kind of makes you think about this idea of keeping up appearances,
Right.
especially in a place like Greenwich, which is known for, affluence, right?
Yeah.
And Andrew Kissel, on the surface, to most people, he was living the American dream, right?
Yeah.
He was successful, wealthy, living in one of the richest zip codes in the country.
Right.
But underneath all that, there was a much darker reality.
Yeah, it's like a total smoke and mirrors situation.
Yeah.
And it makes this deep dive so interesting because he wasn't just like some, small-time con man.
Right.
This guy was defrauding banks and title companies and even people close to them, like out of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So was his murder just like the last stop in a life of crime? Or is there something more to the story?
Well, that's the big question, right?
Right.
And I think before we even get into like all the nitty-gritty of his financial schemes,
Yeah.
it's important to understand that there was a big personal tragedy in his life that happened a few years before his own death.
Yeah.
His brother, Robert, was murdered by his wife in Hong Kong.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine the impact of losing your sibling in such a brutal and unexpected way.
That's unbelievable.
And it's just, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and especially because, from what I gathered from the podcast, Robert was like the golden child of the family.
Yeah.
He's a successful investment banker, played by the rules. And then you have Andrew, who was more of a master manipulator, I guess you could say.
So do you think that Robert's death could have maybe been a catalyst for Andrew's reckless behavior?
Possibly, yeah.
Like maybe a live fast, die young kind of thing?
His friend, Brian Howie, said that Andrew's focus really shifted after that.
Yeah.
It's like the fragility of life became all too real.
Yeah.
And he started indulging in lavish spending, risky ventures.
Right.
Almost like he was trying to escape the pain, maybe even his own mortality.
Wow. That's heavy.
Yeah, it is. And, it's against that backdrop that his fraudulent activities really start to ramp up.
Mm-hmm.
The podcast details all these scams, starting with his role as treasurer of his New York City co-op building.
Yeah, so like for a lot of us, I know for me, this world of high finance, it's kind of like a foreign language. But the podcast mentions that he used like forged documents to secure these massive loans for real estate developments in Greenwich. So how did he actually do that?
He was really audacious.
Yeah.
We're talking like forging signatures of bank executives, creating fake documents to show that mortgages were paid off when they weren't.
Wow.
And he even convinced a title company that a piece of land that he didn't even own was free and clear.
You didn't even own it.
Didn't even own it.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine the shock of Nancy Wiley, who is the title search attorney,
Yeah.
when she uncovered the forgery? She said it was one of the most brazen schemes she had ever seen.
That's incredible that he got away with it for so long.
It is, yeah.
Like, how do you even think to do something like that?
I don't know.
It's mind-boggling how he managed to fool so many people,
It really is.
especially professionals in the field.
Right.
But he doesn't stop there, right?
No, he doesn't.
It gets worse.
Yeah, he doesn't stop with the banks and the title companies. He even targets his own family.
Oh.
His web of deceit, it extended to his closest circle. He defrauded his father-in-law.
Oh, no.
And he even misappropriated funds from his deceased brother's estate.
No way. So this
Yeah.
wasn't just about, like, financial gain for him at that point.
Right.
It seems like there was something else.
It really does, yeah.
Yeah.
It speaks to, like, a deeper compulsion to deceive and manipulate
Right.
the people that trusted him the most.
Yeah.
And
all of this is happening while he's still grieving his brother, trying to keep up this facade of success in Greenwich.
yeah,
That's like a recipe for disaster, wouldn't you say?
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like he built this house of cards and the foundation was crumbling beneath him. The pressure was mounting and, cracks were starting to show.
It's crazy to think that someone could live like that for so long,
I know, it really is.
Like, how did it all finally fall apart?
Well, eventually the facade crumbled.
Right.
The podcast talks about how his wife, Haley, She discovered his forgeries and his infidelities.
Oh, wow.
And their divorce proceedings got really, really ugly.
Mm-hmm.
There were allegations of hidden assets, bitter custody battles.
Right.
And there was even a private investigator who claimed that Haley had wished Andrew was dead
Oh, my God.
during one of their meetings. So things were definitely spiraling out of control.
So it sounds like he was really at a breaking point.
Oh, yeah. By the spring of 2006,
Mm-hmm.
his world was completely imploding.
Yeah.
I mean, he was facing mounting legal troubles, bitter divorce,
Right.
financial ruin was looming over him.
Yeah.
And then on April 3rd, 2006, just days before he was scheduled to plead guilty
Mm-hmm.
to federal bank fraud charges,
Wow.
he's found murdered in the basement of his rented mansion.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, the scene, as described in the podcast, it was horrific.
Yeah.
He was bound, gagged, stabbed multiple times.
So, I mean, who did they think did it?
Well, the brutality of the murder, it definitely raised questions about the motive. Was this just a robbery gone wrong?
Right.
Or was it like a calculated act of revenge? So the podcast highlights the initial suspect, who was Carlos Trujillo,
Okay.
Andrew's driver and personal assistant.
Oh, wow.
Carlos was actually the last person to see Andrew alive.
So it seems pretty straightforward, right?
Well, not really.
Okay.
While Carlos was definitely a person of interest, given his close relationship with Andrew, he insisted on his innocence
Okay.
and cooperated fully with the investigation.
Huh.
Gave fingerprints, DNA samples.
Huh.
He even allowed the police to search his belongings.
And they didn't find anything?
Nope. Despite their suspicions, they couldn't find any concrete evidence
Really?
to link him directly to the crime.
Wow.
So the case went cold for a while,
Oh, wow.
which left investigators frustrated and this big cloud of suspicion hanging over Carlos.
So if not Carlos, then who?
Well, that's where things get interesting.
Okay.
The podcast mentions that over a year later, a new witness came forward, Lenny Trujillo, Carlos's cousin.
Okay.
And Lenny claimed that Carlos paid him to kill Andrew.
What?
Yeah.
That's a huge twist.
It is. So suddenly the focus shifts back to Carlos,
Right.
but this time with a possible accomplice.
Right. But why would Carlos want Andrew dead?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And it gets even more complicated
Okay.
because then this theory emerges that Andrew may have actually orchestrated his own murder.
Hold on. Wait, what?
Yeah, a suicide for hire.
Like to get the insurance money.
Exactly, to secure a $15 million life insurance payout for his children.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
So he's facing financial ruin and prison, and he decides to choose death over facing the consequences.
Well, think about it.
I mean,
He was trapped, desperate, about to lose everything.
right.
Could he have seen this as like a final act of manipulation?
It's so dark.
It is a chilling possibility, right?
Yeah.
And while, the brutality of the murder seems to contradict the idea of a staged suicide,
Yeah.
it's not entirely implausible.
I guess not.
Remember, Andrew is known for his elaborate schemes
Right. Right.
and his manipulative nature.
Mm-hmm.
So could this have been his ultimate con?
That's a tough one to wrap your head around.
It is, yeah.
So did the prosecution buy this theory?
They were skeptical, understandably so.
Yeah.
The sheer violence of the murder just didn't quite fit
Right.
the narrative of a staged suicide.
Yeah.
So they started digging deeper into Carlos's potential involvement
Mm-hmm.
in Andrew's money laundering activities.
Okay.
And bank records actually revealed some suspicious transactions
Uh-huh.
where Carlos and some members of his family had received large sums of money from Andrew
Oh, really?
just before his assets were frozen.
Wow.
So was Carlos just a pawn in Andrew's schemes?
Right.
Or did he have his own motives for wanting him silenced?
Oh, man.
We're left with multiple theories here.
Yeah.
Was it a suicide for hire?
Mm-hmm.
A revenge killing orchestrated by someone Andrew had wronged?
Right.
Or was it Carlos acting independently
Yeah.
to protect himself from being implicated?
So many possibilities.
It's a tangled web, right?
Yeah. So did they ever charge Carlos with the murder?
They did in 2009.
Okay.
Armed with Lenny Trujillo's testimony,
Right.
they felt they finally had enough evidence to charge him with murder
Mm.
and attempted murder.
Oh.
The trial began in November 2010,
Okay.
more than 4 years after Andrew's death.
Wow. That's a long time.
It is. And just like the investigation, the trial itself was full of twists and turns, conflicting accounts, questionable testimonies.
So it sounds like it was a really tough case to prosecute.
It was.
Yeah.
Lenny Trujillo became the prosecution's star witness,
Okay.
but his credibility came under intense scrutiny.
How so?
Well, the defense pointed out inconsistencies in his story,
Mm-hmm.
and they highlighted the fact that Lenny was the one who initiated most of the phone calls with Carlos,
Okay.
which seemed unusual if Carlos was the mastermind, right?
Right.
The podcast also mentions this discrepancy with a Home Depot receipt
Mm-hmm.
for the cable ties used to bind Andrew.
Oh, right.
The date on the receipt didn't match the date Lenny claimed he was with Carlos in Connecticut.
Ah.
So this further cast doubt on his testimony.
So it sounds like a lot hinged on whether the jury believed Lenny's story.
Absolutely, without any physical evidence directly linking Carlos to the crime scene.
Right.
The case really boiled down to a battle of credibility.
Yeah.
A self-confessed accomplice with a criminal history
Mm-hmm.
versus a seemingly loyal assistant
Right.
caught in a web of circumstantial evidence.
Man, that's a tough one for the jury to decide.
It really was.
So what was the verdict?
After 4 days of deliberation, the jury found Carlos not guilty
Not guilty.
on the charge of murder.
Wow, so they didn't believe Lenny.
It seems like they may have had reasonable doubt,
Okay.
but remember, there was still the charge of attempted murder.
Right.
And on that count, the jury was deadlocked.
A hung jury.
Yeah.
So what happened then?
Well, the prosecution was ready to proceed with a retrial.
Okay.
But 3 months later, Carlos decided to plead guilty to attempted murder.
Really?
Yeah,
That's kind of a surprise, isn't it?
it is.
Why would he plead guilty if he was saying he was innocent the whole time?
It seems like it's probably a legal strategy,
Oh, okay.
to get a lighter sentence
Makes sense.
by pleading guilty.
Yeah.
He got a 6-year sentence with credit for time served,
Okay.
which meant he only spent like an additional 3 years behind bars.
So he took a calculated risk,
Yeah, he did.
but it worked out for him, I guess.
It did, in a way.
But we still have so many unanswered questions.
We do.
I mean, did he actually orchestrate Andrew's murder, or was he just involved in a cover-up?
Right.
And what about that whole suicide for hire theory?
Right.
And what was the motive?
That's the big question, the motive.
Yeah,
Those are questions that'll probably haunt this case forever.
it's true.
We may never know the full truth.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what makes the story so compelling.
Right.
It forces us to think about the complexities of human nature,
Yeah.
the blurry lines between guilt and innocence,
Right.
and the power of secrets.
It's a reminder that the truth can be really hard to find.
It can,
What's-
especially when you're dealing with people who are masters of deception.
Like Andrew Kissle.
Exactly.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if you can ever really know anyone.
It does, especially in a world where wealth and status can seemingly buy anything.
It's a chilling thought.
It is.
This whole story really serves as a cautionary tale.
Yeah,
Reminding us that appearances can be so deceiving.
they can,
And even in the most affluent circles, there's always darkness lurking somewhere.
always.
It really challenges us to question motives, to look beyond the facade, and to be wary of anyone who seems too good to be true.
It really does. This case for me, it highlights why we're so fascinated with true crime. It's not just about, the thrill of the mystery.
It's more than that.
It's about trying to understand the darker parts of human behavior,
Yeah.
to make sense of things that seem senseless.
And sometimes, even when the legal case is closed, the moral and ethical questions linger.
They do.
It makes you think about the choices we make, the consequences of our actions,
Absolutely.
and how they impact the people around us.
This has been a wild one.
It has, yeah.
Story of wealth, deceit, and murder.
Well, there you have it, everyone. The curious case of Andrew Kissle.
A story that reminds us that even in the most perfect-looking lives, there are always secrets.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.